Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Exploring a Location in Europe. Today, we're going over to Portugal, which is one of my favorite places in the whole world, and a place that I think is often quite underrepresented in the world of tourism, at least for its full ability to wow and deliver in so many different aspects. So, I hope that you enjoyed this session. I have been going to Portugal since I was a little girl because my great grandfather was actually from the area of La Coruña, and we spent our summers in Galicia, in the north of Spain. And actually, the frontier between Galicia and Portugal is literally next to each other. So we went down to Porto quite a lot. And by very virtue of being Spanish and sharing a close border with Portugal, I've been in this country many times. So I'm very privileged to have firsthand knowledge, to have had, lots of friendships and excellent relationships with Portuguese people to learn about their history, their culture, and be able to share that with as many people as possible. So, today we have actually a very busy travel journey, which I hope you guys really enjoy. So let's jump into the Portuguese wagon. But before I do that, just a couple of things. If you actually like what you find here in Portugal, a lot of the places that I'm actually going to be talking about today, I have lots of small clips on the YouTube channel already to show you what those places look like beside the pictures and what have you not. And before we get started, of course, to say a million thank yous to all of our supporters on PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee. Our sponsors, our donors, are the people who actually keep on going with our support, with our dedication to making history, culture, and traveling as accessible to as many people as possible. So please consider becoming one of our members and sponsors in the links below, either in buymeacoffee/travolution or at paypal.me/travolution tours. And without any further ado, and thanks to the lovely help of these amazing people that have been giving us their support for a really long time now, let's dig into Portugal. Well, today we have a big agenda to fulfill, like I was saying. We are going to be, of course, talking about Lisbon. Lisbon is one of the most amazing cities in Europe. I believe it's definitely one of my favorite places in the whole world. Then we're going to go to technically part of the metropolitan area of Lisbon, which is Sintra. Then we're going to be exploring the western region of Portugal, Oeste, which includes places such as Nazaré, Bataia, Lourinhã, Óbidos, and Alcobaça. And then we will go up to Coimbra, which is a very important town due to its history and education. And then we will, of course, explore Porto and the north of Portugal, El Norte, with Braga and Guimarães. And that is where the story begins. But first things first, let's kick it off with Lisbon. So Lisbon is, one of the oldest urban centers in the whole of Europe. Is actually the second oldest European capital. The first one is, of course, Athens in that regards. And it's really a massive place. The metropolitan area is over 3 million people, increasing actually. And it just has a lot to offer. It's one of the major economic hubs in Europe, not just from the point of view of the money that gets moved through the city via tourism, but overall, I think the majority of the greatest banks that are located in Europe, not necessarily banks that you and I would use on our day-to-day basis, like high street banks, but I'm talking, for big business and finance, have their main head offices in here. And well, it's a city that has a lot to offer. On top of being beautiful, it's been occupied since Neolithic times, and it's been a proper city since the Iron Age, particularly around the castle, which is one of the most important locations in Lisbon to visit for sure. In fact, this is indeed the castle in Lisbon, Castelo São Jorge, which is actually a really nice place to visit. If you want to visit the castle, though, prepare yourself to go up and up and up and up the hill. It's something that you may realize. Lisbon is very much up and down, up and down. The best way of moving around the city, if you find walking difficult, because there's a lot of cobble streets, so if you're going to Lisbon, bring the right footwear. And actually, I say that about Lisbon. This applies to every Portuguese city. The actual use of this type of cobbles is very, very popular, and well, it does make a number on your I'll say it feet. So beware essentially of the pavement. But yes, in order to explore Lisbon properly, you need to go up and down the hill. If you don't feel comfortable doing all that walking, Uber is actually very cheap in Lisbon, in Portugal overall. It works very well, and you have the famous trams. So of course, enjoy the city like the locals. And well, what can I tell you about the castle to convince you to come and have a little look around here, right? Well, actually, I could say many, many different things about castles. Portugal has actually an insane amount of castles that not many people are aware of as a result of the process of the Reconquista, which is, the reconquest of the lands that were taken over by the Muslim forces that arrived into the Iberian Peninsula in the year 711, and that result in the Muslim occupation of Spain and Portugal. So, as part of this reconquering, Portugal is castle land in many ways, and the Castelo São Jorge has actually been occupied, we reckon, since Phoenician times, and it's been a fortress since the 2nd century AD. The castle, in many ways, is one of the most important emblems of the city of Lisbon because it's on top of the hill. You can see it pretty much everywhere you go, and it's actually in a pretty remarkable state of conservation. Inside of the castle, you don't really have many departments. It's mostly the fortress itself that you can visit, but there are a couple of rooms that are actually used, for the sake of displaying artifacts that have been found in situ. And something that you can also find while visiting the castle is part of the ruins and remains of some of the settlements from that Muslim town that actually was located here before the 12th century. The other thing that, of course, is wonderful about the castle is the views that you get of all of Lisbon. So, whether you are really into fortifications or whether you want to see something, quite remarkable in the terms of views and the vibes of it all, is definitely the place to go. Well, let's move on to another very iconic location in Lisbon. One of the best things that you can do being in Lisbon is just walk. Just walk everywhere. And if not walk everywhere, take the tram all across the city center to really familiarize yourselves with this city. But if you're gonna go in and out of Lisbon, you probably will end up at some point anyway in this area, which is the area of Rocio. And this is Rocio train station. Well, it is a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful example of what we call neo-Manueline architecture. This is essentially a type of revival architecture. The building itself is from 1886, which is a reinterpretation of the original Manueline architecture from the age of discovery in Portugal. I'll give you some more details about it in a few moments. But this station is actually very popular, not just because it's one of the main hubs to move around the metropolitan area of Lisbon via train. And in fact, if you're going to go to Sintra, of which I will talk about in a moment, this is a place where you should catch the train from. But the area of Rocio and Rocio train station are very, very popular because they are linked with the history of espionage. A lot of people don't know, but Lisbon is often considered the capital of espionage, dubbed as such by the American military, because during the Second World War, lots of agents from Britain, Spain, Germany came to the town with all kinds of agendas and business at stake. And it was this station, because it's linked next to a hotel, the Avenida Palace, that often became an area for a lot of these deals. People sometimes will go in and never come back out, and likewise, the other way around. And in fact, we're pretty confident that not just Rocio, but the general period of espionage in Lisbon is one of the things that inspired the James Bond novels. So, if you're looking for pretty architecture and something a little bit, with an edge, something that perhaps is not a very popular part of history, but that I think has its own intrigue, then definitely Lisbon has that to offer too. And well, not far away from Rocio, you can actually get up to the opposite view of the castle. So as you see, we're pretty much not exactly level, but in front of the area of the Castelo São Jorge. And this is the view from Carmo of the elevator of Santa Justa. This is the famous lift, which is a beautiful lift in the Rua do Carmo, in the street of Carmo, which is a very important touristic attraction in the city. It's very well known because of the terrace that you can see at the top is also another lovely viewing point in the town. This kind of became the solution to the ups and downs that we have in the city. The proposition to fix and set up, an accessible entrance point for the higher parts of the town came through at the end of the 19th century, but it wasn't really done properly until the year 1900. And the result of that is this beautiful neo-Gothic tower in iron work, and the observation platform itself, which at the top is 45 meters above the ground level. So it's very iconic. It's, to be fair, it's a very expensive attraction, I find. And if you don't want to catch the lift, but you still want to get the same views, or you actually want to appreciate the lift for what it is, because obviously when you are in the lift, you can see it, if you see what I mean. There is the street that goes literally in front of it, which is the way I walked. You can take an enormous amount of stairs and enjoy it no matter what. The stairs take you to the area of El Carmo, which is the area where we have the remains of a lovely Carmelite convent, which unfortunately didn't survive the earthquake of Lisbon, but more on that in a moment. The other reason why the area, though, of the elevator is very popular is because there is a lot of street art over there. So if you're into street art, Lisbon has a few, surprises to give you. Well, let's talk about perhaps one of the most iconic neighborhoods in Lisbon, which is the neighborhood of Belém. And Belém is, although in the city center, a little bit farther away from this area that I've been mentioning just now. The area of Belém is kind of towards the west of Lisbon itself. If you're planning on walking, which is, by the way, very walkable, just consider that, for example, say from the area of Baixa, and where the crossing from Rocio to Carmo is, there is perhaps 50 minutes or so of walking west to actually reach the tower of Belém, which is what you have right in front of you. But you must, if you are in Lisbon, you must go to Belém, because this is a very historic neighborhood. The monuments in this area are all UNESCO protected, and of course the whole area is developed because of its strong associations with the Age of Discovery. This is the area from where Vasco da Gama departed from in 1497. So it is pretty much the core of what Portuguese civilization is going to be known for. And the tower, which is perhaps one of the most emblematic monuments of the city, is the fortified lighthouse that was built between 1515 and 1520 on commission of Dom Manuel I. And Dom Manuel was the king of Portugal, King Manuel I of Portugal, who is going to be very iconic because under his patronage, a lot of the new developments for which Portugal will become well known, will be developed. And one of those is the fortification of the lighthouse, because he was very concerned that now that Portugal had become such an important maritime nation, there may be attacks in the area. So as a result, this is what he comes up with to try and actually protect the entrance to the port. When you go to visit the tower, which by the way you can actually visit in full or see it just from the outside, whatever you would rather do, just keep in mind that there is low tide and high tide, and depending on when you visit during the day, you may be able to actually get to the foot of the tower or not. There is a little beach that forms in there, so keep an eye out on currents and tide times. That's all I'm saying. And of course, just across the road from Belém, the Tower of Belém, you have the monastery of the Jeremites, the Mosteiro dos Jerónimos, which is perhaps one of the most excellent things that you can ever visit while being in Lisbon or in Portugal overall. If you're pressed for time and you don't have a lot of time or cash, do see this. Anything else really kind of dwarfs in comparison to the majestic views, architecture, and history that you have in here. This is also part of the UNESCO heritage of the area, and it was a monastery that was actually used by monks up until 1833. It was actually the moment when Portugal decides to get rid of its monastic order. So after that, there's no I guess, nasty history in that regards. It's just part of the dissolution in these regards. And one of the reasons why the inside of the monastery particularly is very visited is because it's the burial place for many members of the Portuguese royal dynasties. So it's a very important, location in terms of the tombs and the people who are still preserved in there. But even without going in, you can see the beautiful, stunning facade, which is one of the greatest examples of the estilo manuelino, manueline style, which is the style I was mentioning earlier in relation to Rocio, and that I will explain now a bit better. So this style actually appears in Portugal during the 1500s, and it's in theory like an offshoot between Gothic and Renaissance. It grabs some of the most iconic elements of Gothic, like the pointed arch and some elements of structural architecture and sculpture, but it is essentially something that mixes those elements with the early stages of Renaissance, hence the very clean and symmetrical structure, with the maritime motifs, which are going to become, of course, symbolic of the age of discovery. That's the reason why when you look at Manueline architecture, and you have a very good sample here in the facade, you see kind of columns that are twisted, or maybe that look like ropes from the sails of a ship. That is very iconic and classic Manueline architectural style and decoration. But on top of that, this building is quite peculiar because in addition to the Manueline style, we find is one of the very few examples of plateresco, of plateresque, in anywhere outside of Spain, and not even outside of Spain, outside of Castile. That is because the two main architects that actually work on this building were Diogo de Botaiga, which was a Portuguese architect and a very important man to get the project going. But then the Portuguese monarchy brought in Juan de Castillo, who was one of the most important architects working in Castile at that moment in time. So, as you see, it's not just the fact that it's a beautiful and, well, frankly, sometimes a little bit overwhelming building to stare at and to visit because there is so much to look at it. It's just truly a wonder of, anything that has to do with the arts in Portugal at this moment in time, and an absolute display of the relations in the different parts of Iberia. By the way, in case you're not familiar with plateresco style, let me explain. We get the word plateresco from the word plata in Spanish, which means silver, and the plateresque development is essentially something that Spanish architects and sculpture makers borrow from silver and goldsmiths. That's the reason why everything seems to be, decorated to the nines, because of the, I guess, inspiration of filigree. That's where that comes from, and that's why this is so, so special. And well, of course, another important location in Lisbon, which a lot of people visit, and that is probably one of the most iconic locations, is the Praça do Comércio. This is the main square at the end of the neighborhood of Baixa. So we are back in the sort of main city center of Lisbon. It is a massive, massive area. I believe that the total dimensions of Praça do Comércio is something like 30,000 square meters, something like that. And it originally was built to be the new departments of the state in the 19th century, following the very, very devastating earthquake of Lisbon. But I'll show you more about the earthquake in a second. Well, this is an area where you can find a lot of facilities, whether it is the information point for tourism, a lot of linking points with transport, galleries, restaurants, cafeterias, even one of my favorite places in the city, which is the Museum of Cod, the Museum of Bacalhau, which is a very important thing for Portuguese culture. Fishing is part of the backbone of the Portuguese economy, and cod has been pretty much the sustenance of this country and these people for, time immemorial. So, on top of just walking around the square, which is truly quite wonderful because the 19th century architecture is apotheosic in that regard. It's very regal and very impactful. It's also a place where you find a lot of other cultural venues and interesting, places to eat and what have you not, which is very much worth your time. Well, let's move on to the final slide on Lisbon. And this is the monastery of, or the convent of Carmo. Now, as you see, this is an area that is completely open air. The convent did not survive the earthquake. The earthquake that happened in 1755 was incredibly devastating. It was 7.7 on the Richter scale, and it completely destroyed the majority of the city. In fact, 80% of the buildings in Lisbon were obliterated. And the problem wasn't just the earthquake. As a result of the earthquake, there were many fires and even a tsunami that took place. By the way, the earthquake didn't just affect Lisbon, it actually affected the whole coastal side of Portugal, but Lisbon suffered quite badly. And that's one of the reasons why, while you're walking around, you don't necessarily always see how old Lisbon is. You don't see necessarily the remains of a medieval city, because a lot of those buildings, like the convent that you see here, which is actually from the later Middle Ages, it was a Carmelite convent, were completely destroyed. Now this area, which by the way is often not very frequented by tourists, as you can see from the video that pretty much showed, just a couple of people hanging around while I was there. And this was the middle of July, by the way, so it's not like I was there in like January. It's a very good initiative to use the shell of the convent to, well, display a few artifacts that were found in there, and to actually explain overall what happened with the earthquake and the issues that it had for Portugal and Lisbon specifically. And here we are now in Sintra. So Sintra is one of the most picturesque, I guess, towns, villages, districts, whatever you want to call it, in Portugal. It is in the area of Greater Lisbon, and it's also a major touristic destination just because it's such a beautiful, charming place, and it's very close to Lisbon itself. You can actually come and go and see Sintra in just a few hours. It's also a UNESCO World Heritage Area, so the 19th century architecture of Sintra is particularly prominent. And well, there are many, many sites to enjoy in Sintra, apart from having a look around in the town, where, by the way, you would eat like kings. So, keep on remembering that Portuguese food is good and well. The perhaps most important monuments, I'll mention them as we go along. The first one is the National Palace. This is Sintra National Palace. It is from the later Middle Ages to the Renaissance, and it was the royal residence, essentially, of the kings of Portugal, particularly of João I and Manuel. So as you see, our dear Manuel from Lisbon is back here. It's an absolutely stunning palace, not very showy from the outside. It's the building that you see there in the white, but when you actually go inside, you have rooms like this. This is Sala dos Brasones. They have depictions of all of the main emblems and coats of arms of the main Portuguese noble families. And it is truly a beautiful, well-kept, well-preserved, and very accessible royal residence, which is worth all the time and money in the world. And well, just so you get a couple more examples of what you can encounter here, you will see traditional Manueline style, tile work, etc. It's definitely worth coming to see. And then we have another very important destination in Sintra. This is Castelo dos Mouros. Castelo dos Mouros is a castle from the 8th to the 9th century. As you see, it's in a wonderful state of conservation, just like the Castelo de São Jorge. This has to do with the Reconquista and the Muslim heritage of Portugal. It's actually free to enter the grounds, and then for a small charge you can go into the fortress itself. But again, as you see, the castle is on the top of the hill, and this is the problem with Sintra. In Sintra, you really need to keep on walking up and up and up and up and up again, because, well, you're also in the middle of the national park that is in which all of these monuments are located. There is a little bus that takes you up there, and you can take transport to the top of the hill. Parking is not necessarily very easy, so if you're gonna take your own car, keep that in mind. But getting to Sintra is very easy. From Lisbon itself, from Rocio station, is literally just about an hour, if so. So Castelo dos Mouros, very wonderful place, an incredible fortress to actually experience and walk through and understand the landscape, the distances, and again, the back and forth that Portugal had to endure until it became a country of its own right in the 12th century. And then at the top of the hill, so from Castelo dos Mouros you can see this, at the top of the hill you have the famous Paso da Pena. This is at the top of the mountain. It was a medieval ruin that fascinated Ferdinand II, and then he decided to essentially revitalize it with a mix of styles. So it's a wonderful example of 19th century romanticism, and in fact considered one of the best examples of it all in Europe. And as you see, it's a very colorful property. But if you want to go see Paso da Pena, you must book your tickets in advance. They sell very fast, and otherwise you may turn up to the top of the hill and not be able to access it. So, keep this in mind when you're visiting or when you're planning your trip to Sintra, because if you're planning on seeing all of these palaces, there are others, by the way, but I think these are perhaps the most interesting or the most worth your time and money. You will need a lot of time to move yourselves around them and, of course, to visit each of them. Well, let's leave the better known touristic destinations of Portugal to actually go off the beaten path, which, as you know, is where I thrive, is what I like. So let's go west. Let's go west to the beautiful town of Nazaré. Nazaré is a lovely town of about 10,000 inhabitants. It is located in what they call the Costa da Prata, and it's a very, very well-known spot for surfing. The waves in here get up to about 30 meters. They're truly impactful, and the beach is absolutely delightful. Now, remember that the beaches in Portugal are on the Atlantic, so the weather may be beautiful, but the water may still be colder than perhaps what some tourists may expect. This is not the Mediterranean. I know a lot of people often, sort of load Portugal with the rest of Mediterranean countries. This is not Mediterranean land. This is the Atlantic. And, well, it comes with those climatological conditions as well. So keep that in mind. And, well, the area of Nazaré, it's aside from the surfing itself, is just a lovely coastal town. It's very well known because of the name, which of course is based on a legend that says that the Virgin of Nazareth in the old Holy Land was actually brought here in the 4th century AD, and as a result, that is where the town came from. So Nazaré, nice spot if you want to go to the beach, if you want to do some water sports, or if you want to use it as a base of operations. That doesn't have to be Lisbon. It's not far away from Lisbon anyway. Within 2 hours, hours and a half drive, you are there. But not far away from Nazaré, there is one of my favorite places in Portugal, which is this incredible marvel of architecture, which is the monastery of Batalla. Now, Batalla is a Dominican convent, actually, that was created to commemorate the Battle of Aljubarrota, and actually the interpretation center for the Battle of Aljubarrota in 1385 is not far away from here. If you're into military history, it's very important because it's the defining moment in which Portugal put Spain in its place. So, very much a very important location in that regards. The area that you see here is all developed, again, UNESCO heritage, all developed in Gothic and Manueline style, and contains, once again, very important burials from the Aviz dynasty. The whole monastery is like this. I could literally just throw photos at you 24/7. It's breathtaking, and again, a little bit overwhelming because of the constant detail that is created everywhere. And the most fascinating part, at least in my opinion, is the unfinished chapels. This was the last part of the building of the convent itself, and it's unfinished chapels because obviously, as you can see, well, the ceiling weren't quite never done. What happened here is that the royal patronage kind of, not exactly, but sort of ran out. The king didn't quite have time to finish this old thing, and yet, despite them not being, finished, they are such beautiful areas of the monastery. The aura of the whole place really feels like a fairy tale. And again, Bataya is not necessarily a place that is very well visited. I went and visited um, early September, which is a very wonderful time to go to Portugal. Still, high season, and we were maybe 20 people in there. Considering that again, it's a massive complex, and the town itself is relatively small, but it's interesting to see as well. Definitely worth your while, most certainly. Well, now we're gonna go a bit farther down south from this area to visit the area of Lourinhã. And Lourinhã is another small town of about 10,000 inhabitants, which has been occupied since Roman times, but that it's most famous for its paleontology, because we actually find a lot of fossils from dinosaurs and other, bits and pieces, all the way up to the late Jurassic, which is, quite remarkable. There is an interpretation center in there, and on top of the interpretation center, we actually have the amazing place that is Dino Park. Dino Park is just great. It is the largest open-air park in Portugal, with 200 full-size models, which are all scientifically tested and proven. So this is done this way because of the fossils that we found and because they have scientists actually working on this. It is honestly a blast. Whether you like dinosaurs or not, the park itself is beautiful, because it's literally, as you see, a forested area where the different models have been dropped in. So it's very immersive, and actually, I think a very cool way to explore this part of natural history. I think we're so confined to either cheap replicas um, in natural history museums, or just seeing bare bones or stuffed animals, that actually what they've done here, because the things are done at scale, is really quite mind-blowing. And it's not just designed for kids, by the way. Whether you are a young one or an older one, I promise you, is a full blast. And here you have a different example of what the park itself actually looks like. There are different trails divided in different moments in the prehistorical, you know, background of the region, and you do find little plaques that give you explanations about pretty much everything that you're looking for. There is also a small interpretation center before you go in, with fossils and with a few other bits and pieces to give you extra background knowledge. And of course, if you like dinosaurs, the gift shop is just, it's absolutely crazy. It's wonderful. But if you're not so interested in the dinosaurs or whatever, Lourinhã is another nice area around the coast. So it could be another potential spot for a beach holiday, if you see what I mean, with a slight twist. Well, we now go to one of my other very beloved places in Portugal. This is Óbidos. Óbidos is a small town with 3,000 inhabitants, if I remember correctly. It started as a Celtic settlement, but it's very famous for its medieval market, and it's considered as well a city of literature. It has so many different bookstores, a literature festival, and it's a great promoter of the, culture of Portuguese writing. We have so many great literary minds of the Portuguese-speaking world, and Portugal specifically, that unfortunately I feel we often miss when we are approaching it from an English perspective. The translations are not always very well um, common, or not always very good in that regards. And I kind of feel that if you have the potential tendency of getting lost in translation. But one of the most important writers that is celebrated in the city of Óbidos, and in the culture of literature, is José Saramago, José de Sousa Saramago, who is one of the most famous Portuguese writers, since he actually received a Nobel Prize for Literature due to his incredibly imaginative pieces, which are full of irony, by the way. They're actually quite funny things to read in that regards. But the other thing is the medieval fair of Óbidos, which takes place again on the town, because this is a fortified settlement from the Middle Ages with a massive castle, which is really quite, again, like a charming fairy tale place. So as you see, if you really want to see castles, I'm sure most people think of, oh, go to Germany, go to France. Sure, they're very beautiful, but Portugal will give you castles left, right, and center if you let it, and often with a little bit extra. Well, let's go to yet another sort of off the beaten path location in the lovely country of Portugal, which in this case has to do with the religious heritage of the country. It perhaps is not so surprising when we talk a lot about monasteries, churches, and convents in Portugal, because of course it's one of the last bastions of proper Catholicism in Europe, and Catholicism has always been a defining identity of the country. Well, this is the monastery of Alcobaça, which is a UNESCO monastery. There are many UNESCO monasteries in Portugal. They are amongst the best in the whole of Europe. And I say this not just because they are UNESCO monasteries. I have been in all of them. I have traveled all across Europe. I go to a lot of religious monasteries and institutions because, that's part of my foundation as a historian from the Middle Ages. And I've seen very few that compare to what you can see in Batalla, in Alcobaça, or in the monastery in Tomar. Absolutely breathtaking. Everything that we have in Alcobaça is wonderful because it's just absolutely massive. The dimensions of the rooms of the monastery itself is just ginormous. The monastery actually started in the 12th century and it ceased by the 19th century. So again, you have a mix of architectural styles. And one of the reasons why it's very beloved in Portuguese culture and history is because it was one of the very first Gothic buildings in Portugal. And as a, from this perspective, particularly the main church in the monastery is really a referential point for the development of this architectural style, and also because of important royal burials. This is one of them. The degree of the tombs, of the details, the state of conservation of a lot of the paint that you see as well in the area is truly wonderful. But the marble work and the overall, stonework is truly, truly delightful. So if perhaps you're interested in this kind of history, if you're very much into the history of the Middle Ages, the monastic orders and what have you not, Alcobaça is a place to go. And as a result of this monastic, development, almost every other town with a big monastic institution in Portugal has a local bakery, which used to be run by nuns or monks and now tends to be, an independent place. It's the same in Alcobaça. You can find some wonderful, delicious, typical sweets. You will, even if you just go trying every single typical sweet pastry, etc., dessert that you can in Portugal, by the end of the journey, and you may have to get your health checked, because honestly Portugal is a perdition for people with sweet tooth, but they are absolutely gorgeous and often quite cheap. So if you go to the bakery right in front of the entrance of the monastery, you will be eating award-winning pastries that have had the same recipe for like 200 years. So go and give yourself a treat, do yourself a favor, and after absorbing all that wonderful culture, absorb the other culture, which is also formative for the country. Well, let's move further north now. We're going to Coimbra. Now, Coimbra is a relatively well-known city in Portugal because of its background as a university town. But on the outskirts of Coimbra, we have something not a lot of people associate with Portuguese history, which is Roman heritage. On the outskirts of Coimbra, we have Conímbriga, and like I said, many of these places I've mentioned, there are short clips in the channel already, so go check them out. I do have actually a general clip of the whole area of the Roman settlement of Conímbriga, just so you can understand how wonderful it is and the state of conservation. It is in fact the best preserved Roman settlement in Portugal and one of the most important in Western Europe. And what is remarkable about it is that the place is absolutely massive and only 10% has actually been excavated. So in here you can find Roman mosaics, like the one that is just coming into the screen just now. You can find different buildings, temples, architectural pieces for civilian use or otherwise. It's honestly a true delight. And again, a place that is often quite empty because people don't know what there is in here. There is also a wonderful museum that explains the Roman age in Portugal, and not far away from the actual site of Coimbra itself, there is a general interactive Roman museum that takes you on a journey of how life as a Roman citizen would have been in the old area of Lusitania. Well, now we leave the outskirts where Coimbra is to actually go to Coimbra. In Coimbra, there is a very interesting touristic site, which I don't think a lot of people know about, but that I think is wonderful, which is this. This is Portugal dos Pequenitos. This is essentially like a small world kind of museum, open air museum. It is a park where there are scale representations of different parts of the Portuguese landscape from an architectural and urbanistic perspective, but also different parts of the Portuguese speaking world. So as you enter, the first part of Portugal dos Pequenitos that you encounter is actually the many different places where Portugal had colonies. And it's done actually in one of the very few incredibly respectful ways of engaging with colonialism that I've ever seen. You know, the history of colonialism is normally quite bad. Most Western European countries haven't quite developed a sensitivity to engage with their colonialist imperialist efforts pretty well. And, you know, I'm not saying this is the case for everyone overall, but what strikes me as very incredible from the effort in Portugal dos Pequenitos is that Portugal is not presenting these places as, oh, you know, Portugal was so wonderful, look all the places that we conquered. Instead, they are showcasing what the culture of those areas were, why Portugal wanted to have links in there, and what made those places special, and why the Portuguese became a more important, you know, nation and empire as a result of the colonies they were acquiring. So it's actually done from a very inclusive and very interesting perspective. And it's honestly, I think, something everyone should visit. And it works great for both kids and adults. The information is very accessible and it's very interactive, which is what I love about this place. You can go into the replicas of the buildings. Often, if they're talking about spices or natural resources, which is why Portugal wanted these places, you will be able to learn about them, you will smell them, you will touch them. It's actually a really nice way of taking you in this multicultural journey. And then at the back end, you have replicas of different buildings and architectural styles all across different parts of Portugal. So, if you don't have enough time or money to go all around the country trying to explore the area, you can then engage with this part of their local traditions, which I think is actually pretty cool. Well, Portugal dos Pequeninos is actually right at the entrance of Coimbra, from the point of view of the urban entrance into the city. And this is the walk over there. So again, Coimbra, like many Portuguese towns, on the top of a hill. So it's one of those. But actually, Coimbra I find is a bit more easier to move around by transport than perhaps some others. The walk around the river is absolutely gorgeous, and the city itself is very interesting. You know, Coimbra it's a town of about 150,000 inhabitants. It has Roman foundations on top of what we've already seen in Coimbra, and it's one of the main cultural hubs in Portugal because of the university. The University of Coimbra is the oldest in Portugal, it's from the 13th century, and it's actually one of the best European universities that you can go to, particularly for the humanities and certain sciences. But Coimbra is also very well known for a couple of things. As a cultural hub, you will find a lot of art, a lot of street art, and most importantly, Coimbra is very well known because of fado. Now, fado, in case you don't know what it is, and that's what this lovely woman represents over here, is the traditional music of Portugal. It's quite a difficult sound to describe, to be honest. We don't really have anything quite similar to it in any other country. It's a combination of traditional Celtic sounds filtered through the romantic view of the countryside, the changes of the 19th century. But the most important thing is that um, Fado captures the essence of a very Portuguese sentiment, which is saudade. Again, saudade is a very Portuguese thing that doesn't quite have a direct translation or a direct equivalent in the English language, but I guess we could pretty much translate it to nostalgia, melancholy, that kind of stuff. It is very heartfelt, very on the edge of tears sort of thing, and it's a very peculiar type of sound. So this is one of the other reasons why fado was is a very important core of Portuguese culture, and why Coimbra is the place where to visit. Actually, if you don't manage to make it to Coimbra, in Lisbon there is a fado museum dedicated to one of the very famous fado singers, Malia. But in any case, what we know about fado is that we actually have it recorded as dating from the 19th century, but we are sure that it was already being performed much, much earlier than that. And the style of Coimbra fado is influenced by the very existence of the university, which is an area that has developed this kind of university student musical groups called the tuna. The tuna is like a ballad folklore mix of people that play instruments and go around the town trying to make money or entertain the people. It's a very Portuguese and Spanish thing, but in Portugal it's done on a very different high level than in Spain. And the tunas in universities all across Portugal are a big deal. These are proper musicians that literally have won awards, are delivering some of the best music in the country. And well, as someone who has known tuna musicians from Portugal, I can promise you the degree of their music performance is top notch. So another reason why you should go and visit and experience that. And of course, something that you must do in the area is eat. Eat, and eat and eat all the Portuguese food. I've already mentioned bacalhau. I've already mentioned that you need to have, a dig at cod, but there are many other things. A lot of stews in Portugal mix some kind of seafood or fish with beans. Absolutely delicious, very healthy, by the way. And then you also find that Portuguese food tends to be simple flavors, but very effective. And one of the best things about Portugal is that the Portuguese are masters of cooking potatoes, one way or another. The potato is very important in a lot of Portuguese dishes. And in fact, what you see here is just oven potatoes with a little bit of paprika and oil, which is very simple but very effective, and very deliciously tender loin pork, which has been done on the grill, braised, etc. So again, eat to your heart's content in Portugal, as long as, of course, you're happy with the food. Give it a go. Well, let's move a bit farther north to Porto. Porto is the second largest city in Portugal with about 250,000 inhabitants. And one of the things that really, brings people over to Porto is the Douro River, because the Riviera of Porto and the Douro creates port wine, which, all of this has also given the area of Porto UNESCO heritage status. So if you're into enotourism, wine tasting and whatnot, you can come here and really engage with that other aspect of Portuguese inheritance that has, definitely marked the country and its development. Porto is actually one of the most important Atlantic cities, historically speaking. It's actually been one of the most important maritime communities on that part of the world for as long as we can count on. And it is an incredibly beautiful and picturesque town, as you can see. Again, the area around the river is always packed with restaurants and places to eat, but Porto is also another interesting place where to go to the beach. There is an area just outside of Porto called Matosinhos, which has this huge, enormous, long, never-ending beach, and where you can also find local accents of culture and history. This is a representation, a modern art representation of the unfortunate reality of a lot of coastal societies, particularly in Portugal, since it's on the Atlantic, and the Atlantic is a very abrasive, maritime entity, which is the tragedies at sea. Many mariners have lost their lives, whether as fishermen, sailors, or whatever, on the Portuguese coastlines. And often, many of these communities were full of widows. So, again, an element of the Portuguese saudade and the, element of the sea constantly there is something that you will find in many of these, outskirt locations. Although the beaches are wonderful, of course, they come with their own history, with their own baggage, and it's important to respect it and to appreciate it. And well, not far away from Porto, there is also a very wonderful place, which is Santa Maria da Feira. And Santa Maria da Feira has also a very important cultural status because it's the largest medieval reenactment fair in the whole of Europe and part of the whole world, to be honest. It always takes place at the end of July over to August. It's a beautiful town overall. They have, again, a market, vendors, lots of food. They take advantage of the medieval settlement of Santa Maria da Feira to recreate several of the battles and affairs that happened there during the Middle Ages. And it's honestly such a blast. So if you want to go and engage with something that is very important as part of Portuguese culture, go and explore some of these local events, which are very unique and not something that you will find, absolutely everywhere. And well, finally, we're in the north. We're in the norte of Portugal with two very beautiful towns that often a lot of people skip. And we're going to be talking about Braga and Guimarães. Braga is, again, a relatively small city, 190,000 inhabitants, but it's very important because it was another Roman settlement, Bracare Augusta. It actually has some very well preserved Roman baths in the town, which is one of the reasons why it's famous for. And it's also very famous because it's one of the routes for the pathway of St. James, El Camino de Santiago, the pilgrimage route that takes you over to Santiago de Compostela in Galicia. And in Braga, you can see, wonderful examples of Baroque architecture. In many ways, the north of Portugal, Portugal had a wonderful moment of development during Baroque in terms of the arts, but the north of Portugal, perhaps because it's a bit more unexplored by tourism or whatever, has some examples of tile work and architecture that are honestly quite remarkable. And this is from the 18th century. This is the Palace of Raiao, and it's everything that we love about Portuguese traditional style everywhere. That's not to say you cannot enjoy that in places like Porto or in places like Lisbon, but of course, being much larger cities, there is a bigger mix, of architectural styles, and some of these smaller enclaves allow you to engage with, more traditional, unspoiled places, which are very much worth the while. And then we have the town of Guimarães. Now, Guimarães is another UNESCO town because of its very wonderful state of preservation, and it's very popular because it has lots of local festivities. This is the Feria Walteriana, the festivity of Saint Walter, essentially, that happens in August, where they have displays of horse carriages, people in traditional costume. They have a lovely parade in the evening, and it's a very wonderful time of the year to actually be visiting some of these smaller towns. The example of the state of conservation is what you see here. This is one of the many churches and museums that you have in the city center. It's, again, very quiet, very unique, and because it's not necessarily as close to Lisbon as many other places, a lot of people miss it. The easiest way of getting to this part of Portugal is directly from Porto, from Bragança, or from some of the Spanish cities up north, particularly Coruña or Vigo, just so you know. It will require some driving, and the roads can be national roads, not necessarily motorways, but it will also give you a chance to drive through the Portuguese countryside, which is quite wonderful. And something else that we actually have in Guimarães, which is the cable car that takes you up to the Peña Mountain. Again, as you can see, the views are breathtaking, and I think it's very important for people to engage with the Portuguese natural landscape because, unfortunately, due to climate change, humans being humans, and sometimes, disrespect for nature and culture, Portugal suffers from a lot of wildfires during the summer months, some of which are provoked, some others are just, naturally done. So if you have the chance to actually engage with nature respectively in this country, is a very important thing for the locals and for the community. And well, the reason why the Peña mountain is so important is because it's another pilgrimage site. There's lots of pilgrimage sites all across Portugal, lots of sanctuaries on top of the mountains, what have you not. And this one is one of the most famous and well quite an interesting place to go and do something different that very much allows you to engage with Portuguese culture off the beaten path. And that is probably all I can say about Portugal for an hour. I could say a lot more, as I'm sure you all know by now, but I shall let your ears rest for a little while. So, if nothing else, I hope this has given you a very diverse approach to Portugal. I know we have explored some places that are, of course, a bit more on topic, like Lisbon, but you have plenty of options in here to create north to pretty much south. The only area that I've ignored is the area of the Algarve because it's so full of mass tourism right now due to the beach and weather that I'm just attempting to not get people to go and do the same holiday typical stuff over there. But hopefully through this cultural journey through Portugal, you've been able to see so many UNESCO heritage sites, which I'm sure you weren't expecting to see. So many castles, palaces, churches, festivities, nature, that perhaps it will entice you to go and try some sweets, some food, and actually give Portugal the chance that it really deserves to be one of those amazing touristic destinations in Europe without, destroying it through the efforts of mass tourism, which is something that is starting to affect Lisbon. And as you can see, there are many other places worth the time that we can all use to distribute ourselves in a more sustainable way to enjoy the wonders of humanity while being respectful. So, on that note, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Thank you to our sponsors, members, and supporters on Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal. The links are actually on the description, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Have a lovely time, and if you ever end up in Portugal, let me know.